Well, I really wanted to get into what we were going to talk about today, and that's making money with a podcast, because it's just the number one question. Like, after how do you start a podcast, it's okay, I started, how do I make money? And I know that this is something that you get really excited about. And we were talking, before we hit record, that we don't want people to leave this conversation today thinking that they have to have thousands of listeners and millions of downloads. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy when it comes to monetizing a podcast.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think it's super important to monetize a podcast because it makes it possible to keep doing it for a long time and put energy and time into it. If you don't monetize your podcast, it is a hobby. And there's nothing wrong with it, but at some point maybe you get busy and then you have to choose between something that makes you money and something that does not, and then guess what's gonna go. So the reason why I'm so excited about monetizing podcasts is because it makes it possible for people to keep doing it and keep getting your voice out there, sharing your message, and that is what I think is super, super important. And the number one thing that I hear is, like you said, I need to grow my audience more before I monetize, or I need to grow it to 1,000 downloads per episode, or 10,000, or 1,000,000, or I don't know. And that is exactly the problem, because there is always the next milestone. You're never there. Like, you're never gonna reach the goal of the perfect situation where you can monetize your or like you feel like you can monetize your podcast. So my philosophy is actually monetize your podcast before focusing on growing your audience. And I think that in podcasting and starting a podcast and monetizing, I think there's actually 3 steps. First of all, you start a podcast and you make sure you can stay consistent. Doesn't mean that it has to be every week, but you can also be consistent and work in seasons, which is what I do with the Podcast Babes podcast. That is also consistency, but just make sure that you feel comfortable in creating the content. So also for bloggers and for YouTubers, I think it's the same. Make sure that you know what you need to do to create this content, be comfortable in doing that, and make sure that you can keep doing that. Then the next step, I think, is monetizing. Figure out how you want to make money of this thing, and then grow your audience, because there's already money coming in. So that means your idea is validated. That means that once you grow your audience, there's just more money gonna come in. So you can really scale it that way. But you can always wait forever until you've grown your audience. Like, there's no end to that.
Yeah. Oh, this is so, so good. And I'm already thinking about all the different ways that we've talked about here on this show about monetizing a podcast. We've talked about affiliate marketing in the past. We've talked about, creating your own products, books, events, programs, just so many different ways that you can monetize. But what is your favorite way that you always tell people either it's the easiest to get started or it has the biggest return on investment?
100% creating your own products or services. That is just the most profitable way to monetize a podcast with a small audience. Because even if you get one client, whatever you might do, if you get one client, like, it's all yours. It's almost all profit. And when you have affiliate marketing, you always get a percentage. If you have a sponsor, well, for a smaller audience, or maybe an audience that not necessarily niche down, you cannot ask for that much. So, like, to get started, creating your own products or services is, I don't know if it's the easiest way to get started, but definitely the most profitable. 100% the most profitable. So I think that is always something to consider. I'm not saying that it's always the best way to go. For my podcast, I always call this my other podcast, Digital Nomad Stories, I did not want to do anything of that. I did not want to become a digital nomad coach. I did not want to create a course. Like, all the things that I do for the Podcast Babes, I didn't want to do that again and then for a different topic. It just wasn't exciting to me. So I actually monetized that podcast by getting sponsors on my show, which just feels really good because I can just create the content I want to create and people pay me. So it kind of feels like free money. So I think that's also definitely something to consider. Just saying that consider both strategies. Like first, maybe think about, do I want to create my own products or services? If not, then look at the other monetization methods.
Okay, yeah, this is really good. And I love that you're giving us lots of options because it's what I like. Like, I love to kind of see everything out on the table. Like, okay, what are the different paths that I could take? And what really gets me excited? Because like you just said, you have different approaches. And I love, Anne, by the way, that we both have multiple podcasts because it shows that we're truly podcast junkies.
Yes, obsessed, 100% obsessed.
We can't have enough. We can't have enough. But I love that you have different approaches to your content depending on like who the audience is, because I'm assuming your audiences are totally different for each podcast, and you have to really apply, well, this podcast audience would approach sponsorships like they'd be okay to it, but if all of a sudden I started pitching this, like they're not ready for this type of program, or like you said, you know yourself well enough that you didn't want to create those types of services or programs for that audience. So I think that it's really important to understand what you enjoy. I mean, at the end of the day, like, is that really what it comes down to when you make those decisions for your podcast?
Yeah, I think question number one, what do you want to do? Like, how do you want to monetize this podcast? If it's not exciting to you, then definitely don't do it because people will hear it and they will not buy. And I think second question, like you said, what does your audience want? Because if you want to sell a specific service, but it's not aligned with your audience, like if they're like not looking for that, then yeah, it's not gonna work. So question number one, what do you want to do? And then question number two, what is your audience looking for? Like, know your ideal listener or ideal reader or ideal YouTube person, like viewer, watcher. Know them really, really well. It's like an ideal client, even if they're not a client yet.